Oh,
It says live up in the corner on mine.
hello, everybody. This is Nihar Chhaya. I'm an executive coach and president of Partner Exec. And this is my LinkedIn Live series called The Executive Experience, where I get a chance to discuss and interview some of my favorite business and thought leaders around various topics related to career and business success. I'm so excited to welcome my guest today, Chris Littlefield, one of my dear friends and one of the big thought leaders in the field of employee recognition and appreciation. Chris is actually the founder of Beyond Thank You, and he's trained thousands of leaders across companies like Salesforce, the UN, Reserve Bank of Australia, and many more on experiential facilitation and amazing ways to build empathy and connection in the workplace. I also am excited to talk to Chris because he's done so much work in the area of empathy, which I think is very relevant in what he calls the 3 Ps today: pandemic, politics, and protesting. So, Chris, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Good to be here, Nihar. Excited to be able to talk with you today.
Great. Well, and let's actually see who's on the line. If you just joined, please feel free to type in the chat box where you're coming from, where you're tuning in from, and we'd love to see if we can answer your questions as well. So please feel free to, put in questions for Chris that we'll get to. Hit the like and share button if you want to pass the word on to your network that we're on live right now. And so, Chris, let's actually jump right into some of the topics that you and I discussed before. One of the reasons why I wanted to really talk to you today was I had actually written an article in Forbes a few weeks ago called "The 5 Leadership Challenges During the Pandemic," which were based on the work I do with my thanks, Chris, but based on the work I do with my clients. One of which that's really come up, I think now, is the fact that we're so burned out and we're so challenged with our own sense of, are we going to be okay, and how do we get so much done with such little time and constraints, being distant from each other, that to expect me to be empathetic to somebody else is really hard. I'm burned out myself. So tell us a little bit about what you're observing as it relates to empathy, and maybe a little bit about what you would advise in situations like that.
Well, I think in general, it's funny because, it's like I'm home with a 4-year-old, and my wife is working one room over. My 4-year-old is now asleep behind the camera in the next room over here, and may break in at some point in time during this discussion. But I think that we have so many different things that are on top of us right now, from the uncertainty of what's going on in the world around us, to what we're dealing with at home, to the uncertainty around our businesses, right? And if we weren't in the 3 Ps right now with the protests, pandemics, and the politics, if you're in the US, and regardless of where in the world, you're dealing with all 3 of these in one form or another right now. But I think that we always have to remember all these different factors that are impacting us. And it's hard when we're stressed out, right? When that amygdala is hijacked and we're hyper-focused on, I can't believe that person did that to me. I can't believe they didn't CC me on that email. I can't believe they made that decision without thinking of me. Or I can't believe they asked me to be on this virtual meeting at 9 o'clock at night when I need to take care of my kids, right? Or I need to be able to do this. Or how can they expect me to do this work? Because when we're so stressed out, we're so focused on what we don't have that we sometimes forget about what we do have. And I know, 2 days ago, I was running a virtual workshop, and there was a miscommunication between the person who was hosting it, and they posted a different session than I thought I was leading. So I'd been preparing for days for a different session. It changed, and I was out at the grocery store and I received the email, and I was like, I can't believe it. And that triggered reaction came on me. And I'm like, I can't believe this. And all those, I can't, how could they come on? And so been doing this work and coaching others in how to be empathetic in points of frustration for years, my reminder is, if I hear the machine guns come out, if I want to attack, if I want to defend, if I think that they're wrong, then that right there triggers something else in me to look at. Okay, first of all, don't respond right now, put my phone away. Take 10 minutes to slow down. And then I do for myself, I do a practice, which I do with my coaching clients, which I call social factoring, right? Okay. And social factoring is, and maybe I'm using this math term wrong, but I've always called it social factoring, is looking at what are all the factors that are contributing to my current state of mind. I am right now just got out of taking care of my daughter. I woke up, I didn't get breakfast, and I ran out to the grocery store in a rush to get there before the line broke out. I'm wearing protective gear because I'm going into a grocery store, and there's been a huge, in Chile where I live, there's been a huge influx of cases here. So I'm dealing with the stress of that. I'm dealing with the stress of my child, uncertainty around my business, haven't eaten breakfast. It's a great day outside, but looking at all those factors that are contributing to my current state of mind, right? And then once I look at that, then I realize that how I'm feeling right now is not just related to this one instance I just had with this person via email, and it has a lot to do with all the different factors. And in doing that, it calms myself down. And then my next step is, what is this other person going through right now? I'm assuming they're doing this. And then as soon as I ask myself that question, oh, they're organizing this on top of their day-to-day job. I have no clue what they're dealing with at home. And as soon as I ask myself those questions and I put myself in the other world of the other person, then I realize, hey, I'm getting frustrated. And is this really that huge? No, it's a slight change on myself. And that breaks me out of that triggered reaction and goes from having an unconscious, amygdala hijack response to a conscious response. And it brings me back and allows me to be more empathetic to myself, and even more so be more empathetic to that other person. Does that make sense?
Wonderful, Chris. Yeah, and actually just want to give a quick shout out to a few folks that have already joined. Our friend Rebecca is on the line as well.
Hi,
Rebecca. So happy to see there, Rebecca. We also have Allison Jane McAvoy here. Keep providing your questions and your comments, and keep the discussion going. Chris, to your point, I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I think you're touching on that's pretty difficult for, I think, humans in general is to take the time to be aware, snap out of the trigger, like you said, the amygdala hijack that happens, and then actually put your focus completely on somebody else. I mean, in some ways that actually feels like superhuman. And, and one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, so to the people in the audience right now, one of the things that's really exciting about Chris's work is that he's taken empathy and experiences around connection with people to international conflicts around the world. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict, I believe Northern Ireland, a lot of other areas that we can talk about. And you've shared a little bit in your work about how this idea of really getting people out of themselves to create connection with other people is the only way we're going to get through conflict. Can you share a little bit more about your work there and how you've taught people to really think on a broader scale?
Yeah, and I think it's less about teaching people to do it, but helping people understand that it's safe to do that. And I think that many times, in order for us to open up in business, we talk a lot about creating emotional safety, but rarely we talk about what are the actions and behaviors that have people feel safe to express themselves, right? It's not that people don't want to talk. It's that they often don't feel safe to talk, that they're walking around with this concern, this fear, this worry, this self-doubt, and they'd like to check in with it, but then they often don't share that because I don't know what's going to happen. And I find in the works where I was facilitating dialogues with people from different sides of conflict, it was always about, for me, I was always the third party facilitator. So what I mean by third party facilitators, if I'm facilitating between Israelis and Palestinians, or Armenians and Azerbaijanis, there's always a facilitator from either side of that conflict, and then a third party facilitator who's supposedly neutral, but if you're American, you're never perceived as neutral. But so I always had to create that safety. And my job was always to nurture and create an environment where people could see that person that's sitting across the table as a human being that they can trust to have that conversation with. And so as that facilitator, my job, and I do this in my work around, shifting people's relationship to giving and receiving recognition, because the same reason why people don't give feedback, they don't recognize others, they don't initiate an activity in their group meeting, is outcome uncertainty. I don't know how you're going to respond if I bring up this topic. I don't know how you're going to respond if I compliment you. Are you going to take it as a compliment, or are you thinking I'm hitting on you, or you have some hidden agenda and you just want something? And so creating that safety means that we're doing things on an ongoing basis to build relationships with a person. And so for me, when I'm going in to work with a group, my thought process is, here's this person just arriving in this conversation. What can I do right now to put them at ease? And maybe it's and I hate the term icebreaker, but something in the beginning that helps us have connection before we go into the content. And I'll quote Chad Littlefield, who does similar work. I think it's Peter Bach. I think that's his quote, but I always relate it to Chad Littlefield, that connection before content. right? Is that we need to connect to human beings. You and I, before we hopped on today, we're talking to our kids about what we're watching on Netflix and being a father at an older age, and having that connection before we go into talking about work, right? And so whenever I was working in these cross-border programs, or even facilitating between an executive team that's not talking with each other, the aim was to create that connection, right? And maybe that's by playing a game in the beginning, or asking a question like, hey, what's one thing that you completely took for granted before this whole situation broke out that you really appreciate now, right? And like being able to go out and go for a walk, where I am in Chile, we're on complete lockdown now. And using those questions or those activities to give people a chance to see the human being on the other side, opposed to the person who did or didn't do what I needed them to do.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. And Chris, you touched on, I'm glad you actually shifted a little bit to workplace appreciation, because you touched on something that's really interesting. Like it sounds like the corporate culture we're in doesn't really design itself well to being overly gushy with your recognition or your appreciation. It's almost like people feel either they can see through it and they feel like, oh, my boss is just doing it because they have to do it, or like as I think you've done some research on this, where we actually feel uncomfortable saying certain things to people because it's very vulnerable. It requires a lot of vulnerability. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a much longer conversation, but when I went from working in conflict resolution to employee recognition because I had a toxic relationship with two of my coworkers. And what resolved it was a 15-minute recognition activity when a year of conversations and dialogue didn't change it. That one recognition conversation or activity opened the door and transformed a relationship when nothing else worked. And so I started studying. I know we've talked about this before, but I did an experiment where I interviewed 400 people on the subway in Boston about the role of recognition in their life. And when I started looking, I knew that recognition was important. And when I talk about recognition, I'm not talking about rewards and awards, right? Most people collapse recognition and rewards and awards, where rewards and awards are a delivery tool for the message. Recognition is recognizing the process and the effort and what it took and when that person sacrificed to do something, right? And it's the message. The reward and award is the tangible thing we may do to emphasize that comment that we're making or that appreciation. So when I ask people, I'd say, what made a good acknowledgement? What made a good compliment? What has you feel valued in the workplace? Many times people would say, well, I hate when my boss sandwiches feedback between two compliments, right? When they go, Nihar, you're really great. Yeah. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. But if you make a mistake like you did in the project last week, we're going to have to talk about your future here. But Nihar, we really love having you here, right? And you're like, was that a compliment? And what I found in that is I identified that there's a lot of ways that people misuse recognition or they manipulate with recognition. If you look at Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, one of the weapons of influence he talks about is reciprocity. I compliment you, you owe me something back. Right. I give you something, you give me something back. And so if I compliment you, you owe me something, right? And it triggers that reciprocity. And because people have used recognition as a motivation technique, we don't know if the person's actually being honest with us and they're really authentically recognizing us, or there's some hidden intention behind it. And so what I spend most of my time doing is, if we want that emotional safety, and I relate to recognition as conflict prevention, right? Because what I found in my work is that I would say most, if not all, of the conflict at the heart of it is the real or perceived experience of being valued by the other person, of not being valued by the other person. If you look at any conflict you have at home or in the workplace, most of the time, the experience is, you don't value me. You don't value my contribution. You don't value my effort. You don't value what I sacrifice to do my work each day. You don't value my ideas, the effort I put in. Like, that's when you hear people say, well, they don't recognize, they don't appreciate me, they don't value me. That's usually where most of the conflict, and then the action afterwards is, screw you, I'm not going to work. You don't care about my work. I just did all this work on this report and you're not even going to use it. Screw you. Excuse my language, but that's the experience. And so I shifted to do recognition work, because if we're being authentic and sharing and showing to people, hey, I see, Nihar, that you just spent the whole weekend away from your kid finishing that report to get it done so we have it prepared for the client on Monday. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that work with a baby at home. Or thank you trying to get there and have that client meeting when I know that you and your wife are balancing work together.
Right.
And so I think it's making sure that we're always taking time to understand is that empathy is when I get in the world and see what you're sacrificing, what you're contributing, and taking time to see that. And the challenge is, like you said, is we feel like that's soft and fluffy to say that, but I'm not talking about, oh, tears, Nihar, it's the greatest thing. No, it's just saying, it's like, hey, I get you sacrificed something to do it. And I want you to know I saw what you did. And if I didn't, I'm asking you, hey, what did it take to do that? So I get into your world to understand what you sacrificed to make that result possible. I hope I answered your question.
I love that, Chris. Yeah, because it brings to mind a lot of times when I'm working with my executive coaching clients where they'll say, listen, I want to appreciate my folks. I want to recognize them. What should I do? And they kind of want like a cookie cutter formula, right? Let me give them a gift card. Let me take them out, do a happy hour or whatever. I think this is why you call your company Beyond Thank You, right? Because it's really about more than just thank you. I love what you're talking about in terms of recognizing what it took for them to go through to get to to the accomplishment. In other words, you're really recognizing the A to B gap that they with fortitude they overcame, not just looking at the B where they achieved it.
Yeah. It's funny you say, like, I have this because I ran a workshop on the other day, so it's going to be kind of a messy diagram here, but you may be able to see it here. It's like what I was talking about, and it's a really messy diagram, but I'm saying it's like, hey, at work, we're always talking about here's the result we actually produced, right? And here's the goal, our target that we may have had, right? And we're always, as leaders, we tend to focus on the gap in performance.
Yeah.
And getting to this result we produced, if we always look at, we need to get better, and we do need to improve. But what people want to be recognized is for the mess that they had to get through to get that result that they did.
Yeah, that's
I don't know about you, but like writing an article, landing a new client, having a conversation, or keeping your relationship on good terms in a pandemic, right? It takes a lot of work. And this is what we sacrifice at work. This is what we deal with at home. And this is what we deal with in our head to get to that result. Yes. And as leaders, I would say that we don't see in a normal time, we don't see 98.35% of what people go through over here. We just see the end result or a few check-in points. Right. Unless we ask questions to learn about that. And right now, I think it's closer to 99% because, when we're co-located, we bump into each other and we see if someone's feeling good or feeling down. We pick up on that. But now we don't see that. We don't have those unintentional bump-ins in the hall before meetings and stuff.
Well, and Chris, before we jump into one of the questions, I want to just call out a couple of friends that have joined. Albert Atkins, a good friend of mine. He's in Colombia, actually, I believe, still. And Ron is on the phone on the LinkedIn Live, as you both know Ron very well. Abdallah Yaqub. Thanks so much for being on the live stream here. Albert actually had a question for you, Chris. And I think this is what we've been kind of touching on, but if you have any additional input, I think it'd be great. Any advice on creating that connection and safe space in this remote work world we're living in now? It seems remote work creates less space to be human and have empathy.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so part of how we connected is I just published a book, 75 Team Building Activities for Remote Teams. And it was literally because I was working on another book, but I think Nihar called me the corporate America the other day, and I absolutely loved it. We were joking around, and he shared that with me. And largely was I wrote this book because one thing that I've always had is activities, right? Is people want to connect with their people, but they just don't know what to do. And so I put this book together of activities, literally, so people would say, hey, what do I need to do right now? How do I start this next meeting? Because you know what, I have this meeting or I have this one-on-one and I don't know what to do, right? So how do I bring fun and play to that? And I always feel like, one, we want to make sure every meeting starts with connection before content, and it always closes with gratitude before goodbye, right? And so if we have a 1 hour meeting, I call it in the book, I call it the 1-6 rule. If we have a 1 hour meeting, 10 minutes of it, 1/6 of it should be devoted to connection, into building relationships. And that may be 2 minutes in the beginning to just do a question. Like one of the things I think I shared in LinkedIn today is a pulse check question. Like starting out and saying, hey, how's everybody doing on a 1 to 10 scale right now? 1 being completely burned out to 10 being fully energized. What's your energy level today? And then having people just quickly check in. And then as a manager, noting what number people put down, or how are you feeling about what's going on in the US? If you're in the US right now, fully fired up and ready to go and see what I can do, to 1, just feeling completely lost, and having put that scale and then using that to open up a conversation. And then inside the book, I also just use questions. What are some of the things that we can do to just engage? And then other things, there's games in there where you can just.
Still there, Chris?
So that's one of the other games that's in the book, which I call freeze. Pretend you're frozen. And if the
Did I fall for that?
You fell for it, right? To bring play into our interactions, right? Exactly. Or like, just keep one thing is just like put some masks, like, or a hat on that you bring. Call me Captain Appreciation here, but just put some things on to bring play. Like one person, sent me a note after they got the book the other day. So I saw like the masked meeting idea, and she didn't tell anybody. She just showed up to her call with a cowboy hat on. And in 5 minutes, everybody went and ran and got hats and put them on, and they had their whole meeting like this. Wow. But I think the thing is, it's just about trying something. And I find that a lot of people, same as I was talking about before, hey, I don't want to, I don't know how people are going to respond. We never do this stuff. Well, great. Guess what? They're probably craving it. And some people like, I don't have time. But you can do another thing, like have a virtual scavenger hunt. Like, hey, everybody right now, and this is in the book as well, I want you to go and find the oldest piece of food in your cupboard right now. So the oldest expiration date, and bring it back to the call. Give people 5 minutes to go get it. Or share one thing that's really taking care of you through this whole incident right now that's really just been a saving grace, right? And I have this on my desk. I don't always keep a bottle of wine on my desk, but I did a workshop earlier today virtually. But bringing that play and fun and always having that variety. So when I was running those retreats, it was always about balancing a variety of fun and laughter and deeper connection, of taking that conversation and learning about each other and then laughing with each other. And then maybe having a slightly deeper conversation, like having your employees go out and interview each other about what it's like to work with each other, which is a very uncomfortable conversation. Or if you're a manager and in the customer service, one of the activities in the book is go out and interview your customers about how they're doing right now. And so you say, as a leader, you know what? I want you to go interview 3 customers right now about what their experience is. And there's questions in the books that they can use, but go out and interview them. In our next meeting, you're going to report back what you learned and what follow-up actions we can do to better support and build deeper relationships with our customers right now, right? Where that challenges them, it develops their skills and their ability to connect with their customers. It helps support your business, and it does something that challenges people to step outside of the world they are and develop more empathy for their customer at the same time, right? And so I think to answer your question is there's so many things that we can do. We just need to try something. And the whole purpose of me putting that book together was to take the thinking out of it. So I don't need to scrounge around online and say like, okay, here's one thing, here's another thing. Here's everything in one book. And then I have a quick start guide in the beginning to, hey, here's some great team rituals to do.
I'm a big fan of the book, Chris. So everybody, I put the link here to access his book. I believe it's a link to a page where you can buy it. And really, I will say, just in terms of my recommendations to some of my clients, it's been a hit. These are, at least in the work I do, a lot of the corporate leaders I work with really are very busy with their own kind of deliverables and their own businesses, that to even think like a facilitator or think like a camp counselor is completely out of their comfort zone and even really out of their awareness. So this is a great place to get some ideas and really implement them. One of the things I'll just say on a side note, so Chris is in Chile. I'm in Dallas. We WhatsApp a lot. We both have 2 young girls. We have young girls at home. I have a 10-month-old. He has a 4-year-old. And one of the things that I love about Chris, that I'm in awe of him and a little bit envious, is that every day or so, if we're WhatsApping, he'll send me a photo of a new camp activity that he's done with his daughter. Whether it's what are some examples? I mean, you've kind of built a castle.
I mean, this morning right now, we have the couches flipped over into a fort downstairs. We disassembled an old vacuum cleaner the other day and took it apart. We made bagels the other day. But for me, it's also self-preservation, because sitting there with nothing to do for an hour is awkward for her and awkward for me. And if she just
And I was going to say that you actually were a camp counselor for a lot of your career, right? I mean, which is why I joked that I said you're the camp counselor for the corporate world. But it's kind of, there's something interesting there, right? We're all kind of kids at heart, And we all kind of still had the same needs for connection and being seen and heard and recognized as we would when we were kids.
And we need to play. It's like I did a retreat a couple of years ago for senior leaders in a UN agency, and I remember coming in and everyone's in their suits, and I was super stressed out about going into this because this was, these were senior diplomats and ambassadors and things like that. They're all in the room, and I get there to the group and I look at them and I'm just like, okay, I can sit here and skip what I would normally do, but the truth is, these are a bunch of kids wearing suits right now. And I remember I was just like, okay, we're gonna go outside and I'm gonna play quick draw with you, and we're gonna play this rock paper scissors world champions. Within 2 minutes, they're laughing, they're playing, everything like that, and they walked back into the room and they sat down. As that play is so important, and even in challenging times. Another retreat I ran, it was also in the Middle East, was I flew out and they flew me from Chile over to Beirut where I was running it, and it was a nonprofit and they wanted me to run a retreat in an all staff. And when I landed, the executive director at the time met me at the airport in tears. She's like, we just found out we didn't get funding. No one's going to have a job in the next 8 weeks. Right. So instead of having a retreat to build connection on the team, we were actually having to close the nonprofit. And they thought it was 8 weeks. Turned out once we looked at the numbers, they had a week and a half and everyone was going to be out of work. And during that retreat with the senior management team, I have a picture and I put it up in my workshop where here are all these folks from all over the country, and we're playing a game together and we're having very serious conversations afterwards, but we also need to be able to laugh at the same time. And so having that balance, it's not about laughter all the time. It's not about expressing appreciation all the time. It's showing people that I value you and I value all your needs. Needs to laugh and play, and the needs to sit down, get serious, and deal with what we need to deal with. But we need to have the relationship capital built up so that we can have those difficult conversations. Because if not, and we just go in cold all the time, and I think that's why a lot of leaders are struggling right now, is that I haven't built that relationship with my people. So when there is a difficult situation that comes up, it's really hard to go from not talking about anything to all of a sudden saying, so how are you doing? Right? Like, we don't have that relationship. And that's why it's so important to remember that our relationships are something that we're building and maintaining on an ongoing basis all the time, right? And that's why it's so important to have team rituals, to have regular check-ins, to meeting with people, having those one-on-ones so that we're constantly understanding what's going on in that person's world. Because if not, it's like buying a gift for a stranger. It's just awkward. Right. Like, what do I bring them? Okay, I bring them a bottle of wine and I find out they don't drink, right? Yeah.
But Chris, what do you do when you have the best intentions to really show people you care, you want to listen? I think of, for instance, the setting we're in right now with Black Lives Matter and the protests, for instance, where people don't really know what to say. So they're in their hearts, they actually have the best intentions. They actually want to come closer to the other side. But and I think you touched on this, the fact that we are concerned about what the outcome, the uncertainty of the outcome is there. But what if people don't want to be bothered? Like, what if they really don't even want your empathy right now, or they don't want you to even really be in their business right now?
I think one to remember is that, an article I did recently was, what are the best ways to show our appreciation, right, remotely? And the first one on the top of the list was flexibility and understanding, right? It's like, I always remember, and this is not even close to it, but just a situation like when I lost my father, right? And I remember, like, people would come up to me and they'd be so sad. And I'm like, right now I'm not feeling sad. And I forget that, like, it's this whole golden rule, platinum rule mentality. Like, that golden rule is treat others the way you want to be treated. Like, you may feel sad right now. You may feel bad, or as a white person feeling the white guilt, and I need to reach out and support that person. But what does that person need right now? Right? And I think one of the best things we can do is, I don't know what to do to support you right now. I want you to know I care. I want you to know I'm here to listen. And I want you to know whatever I can do, I'm here for you as much as I can be in whatever way you need that. And then I think putting that reminder in to keep on checking in, because I think everybody, runs to support when the issue's out there on the table, it's in the news, but people forget is where the real support was needed was before this even happened, which we can't go back there, but it's going to be needed 2 months from now. And a really great thing leaders can do is say, hey, you know what? I reached out before, but I want to check in and see how you're doing now, and putting a little note in your calendar to say, hey, I want to reach out to that nurse friend who was working in healthcare, or that family friend who had somebody who was really struggling from coronavirus, or someone who I know that my coworker just lost their job. And then putting that reminder to check back in with them 1 month from now. Because if you've ever had that happen where somebody out of the blue remembered something you were struggling with before and checked in to see how you're doing, few things have you feel more valued and appreciated than somebody reaching out without a cue and remembering to check in with you.
Yeah, that is so powerful. It kind of restores your faith in humanity, that people aren't just doing things when you need them. They're actually aware that you're going to need that help later. Not help, but you're going to need that support even in unpredictable times. I love that. We are actually reaching the end of the half hour. Does anybody have any questions? I want to make sure that we're not missing out any opportunities here for people to ask Chris questions. In the meantime, if you are typing anything in the chat box, I definitely want to encourage you to follow Chris. You can actually, if you're not already connected with him on LinkedIn, simply go to his LinkedIn profile and hit follow. Certainly do that with me as well if we're not connected. We'll be doing hopefully another dialogue at some point, Chris, because there's not enough time for us to cover everything. And I also want to make sure that you are looking at his book, because I do think it's going to be an eye opener, whether you are actually in charge of leading teams and engaging them, or whether you're on a team and you want to find a way to feel better, more engaged. And I always laugh because I used to work internally at various companies, and I just really hated when we would have like the kind of forced team building activities. It's like, Hawaiian shirt day and, and things like that. And it's like, but I really feel like when I read your book, it's just, there's just real stuff there that people can use, and it's very unique.
I think the best part is that everything that's in there is all stuff that you can use once you return to the office, with the exception of a couple of things that are very specific for video conference. You're not going to play freeze in a live meeting, right? But there's a lot of stuff in there that you can do once you're back in the office as well. There's stay conversation questions that are there. And I think someone just had a question here. Chris, what's the best way to launch a SurveyMonkey assessment?
I think I know who that is.
Oh, I know who that is too. Hello, Ron Carucci.
You can answer it if you want.
How to launch a SurveyMonkey survey without your help? You're hilarious, Ron. I'll get that one with you afterwards. No, but I think but by the way, I know Ron was joking with that because I helped him out with the SurveyMonkey thing. But I think one powerful thing you can do right now with your team is reach out and check in with what is their experience right now, and maybe a confidential way to say, hey, how are you dealing at home? How are you feeling supported right now? And what are we doing that's having you feel supported as a company? And what are we doing that doesn't have you feel supported? What do you wish your manager understood about what it's like to do your job right now remotely? What are the things you're missing? And using those questions, because I think it's really great. If we want to trigger empathy in others, then we need to spend time asking to understand the experience of others. And whether that's out in our community, whether that's with our family members, whether that's with our employees, we do need to be taking time to ask and make it safe for people to share how they really are feeling. Because just because they're smiling, and I just read this in an article, just because they're smiling to you on the camera doesn't mean they're struggling as soon as they turn it off.
That's a great point and profound. And I wanted to say, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. It's always fun to chat. And one thing I will leave you with is, I think people loved the frozen idea. I certainly fell for it. And I think with Zoom and remote, I think it'd be funny if I try that with some of my clients and see what happens. I might not do it. I don't have the courage yet, but I love the idea.
Bring a little play and bring a little laughter. It makes every conversation easier.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for everybody for joining in, and have a great rest of your day.
Great to connect with everybody. Take care. Have a wonderful day.